I just have mainly kind of for Selena and Anya, because I was really just shocked at the, like I know there's obviously, you know, an attitude, but the stuff about TUSLA, but I just firstly want to say to Fiona and Claire the points in your statements where I think, Fiona, you say AHR and surrogacy are here, the law must now catch up, and Claire, you say a lack of regulation will stop couples, will not stop couples from travelling to other jurisdictions. It will result in less guidance in terms of safe and best practice for intending parents, and that just goes to the crux of everything that we're trying to achieve, because it's obviously a serious privilege to be elected to either the Dáil or the Seanad, but it comes with a serious responsibility, and as legislators we have ignored for far too long the amount of families that are not recognised, and I just think we really need to address that regardless of what anybody believes or thinks. We cannot have a situation where you don't get the choice when you're a legislator to have that. So I just wanted to, because I don't really have very many specific questions for you both, but I wanted to acknowledge that. So Selena or Anya, could you come in on particularly around the TUSLA aspect, and then if there's time I might ask a pre-birth, post-birth question to Fiona, if that's okay. Thanks, Chair.
Good, yes, Selena, I can take that. So yeah, it's just that we find when we're doing sort of looking at our policy and from speaking to different kind of childcare related professionals, and again, we're coming at this constantly from the perspective of disabled parents. So we understand that there's child safety concerns, which is an element to their work, but we see that the system that is in place, like I said about the parenting capacity assessments, it doesn't, you're kind of starting off on the wrong foot being a disabled parent coming into any child protection issues through national kind of services, whatever they are, that the assessments that are done don't recognise your abilities, that there is assumptions about whether you should have become a parent in the first place. Disabled people also have to deal with, like we've said, about the costs related to surrogacy. There's an additional cost of living your day-to-day life, and that can impact on you know, raising a child. Is not a cheap thing. So there's, yeah, just very kind of different attitudes, things, very simple things about where meetings are held. There's been examples of people not being physically able to attend meetings because there isn't a lift, or the meeting takes place upstairs, and it's not always possible to meet. You know, accessibility means that notice for meetings where your parenting is going to be assessed might be very short notice. There might be an awful lot of materials, particularly if there's legal proceedings, you know, legalese, very dense materials, and it's difficult to navigate your way around those systems. We think that there is a lack of sort of independent advocacy. We think that would go a long way, sort of a parent advocate independent to your legal advocate would go a long way to supporting you through any kind of childcare proceedings, whether it's sort of at an informal or at a court level. Okay,
thanks very much. I think that's something that we really need to challenge, and I know it doesn't just probably fall to this committee, but it falls to probably Children's and the Disability Matters Committee as well. I know they've been doing work on it, but I think it's just, as Senator Siri Carney said, we just need to highlight that. Because there's time, can I just ask you, Fiona, about the pre-birth versus post-birth parentage situation? So I would say or think that a pre-birth model is the best way forward, where bodily autonomy is obviously with the woman until birth, and then the intended parents are the parents and kind of take over, for want of better words. Can you just give your own thoughts or views or experiences, and would that be a more efficient situation for people who are travelling abroad? I know there's obviously going to be the emergency travel with passports. You know, you have to wait until a baby is born for a passport and stuff like that, but just your kind of thoughts on that situation.
I suppose, firstly, if somebody's going abroad for surrogacy, we here would have no control over whether it's a pre or post-birth order, so they're stuck with whatever the regime is where they go. So that's first. I mean, we could have that control in terms of domestic surrogacy, but not necessarily in terms of what happens abroad. In the US, most orders are pre-birth orders, but it is also possible to get a post-birth order as well. And recently I have been tending, and sorry, I mean, to a large extent, because there's no regulation, there's no strict law, you've got to sort of constantly keep evolving and deciding on different methods of dealing with this. But recently I've been leaning more towards asking clients to also get a post-birth order. And so the difference between the two often, and one state, for example, is Florida, where there is a pre and post-birth order system. And the pre-birth order, basically the court looks at the agreement that has been entered into it and sort of accepts it as being a valid agreement. And then they set out in that directions as to what's to happen as soon as the child is born. The court accepts jurisdiction for dealing with it, but gives directions in terms of to doctors, to institutions, as to who they might take instructions from in relation to a child as soon as the child is born. And then the post-birth order is done after the baby is born, before the registration, and it is a final confirmatory order, but it's done quite shortly after the birth. And the advantage of the pre-birth order is that it gives more certainty to doctors, for example, and I think Mary Wingfield did reference this the day she was here. And in fact, I'm dealing with a case at the moment of a child due in this jurisdiction through surrogacy, and sort of there's a big debate going on between the intending parents and the hospital as to who's going to take instructions as soon as the baby is born. And there's that desperate difficulty for the intending parents because they want to, it's their child, the surrogate mother wants them to have the child, but yet the hospital is saying, well, look, she's the mother under law, and therefore we should only take instructions from her. And so with having either a pre-birth order system here, and there is provision in the AHR bill, sorry, I know I'm deviating to Irish law here, but there is a provision in our legislation for the appointment of the our bill for the appointment of intending parents as guardians. But it's not clear. I sort of would like to think that that's something that could be done before the baby is born, so that they would automatically be guardians when the child is born and could make those decisions. But I think that's probably been too optimistic. But I think that has to happen. There has to be, you can't have that grey area the minute the baby's born. And in terms of the surrogate mother's autonomy, certainly in any agreements that I've seen abroad, the surrogate mother has absolute autonomy in relation to everything to do with the pregnancy. And it is just that at that stage, once the baby's born, then the authority of the instructions of the intending parents should be accepted.
Yeah. Can I just ask really briefly, in the Florida system, is there a time frame if they do pre and post? Like, is there, is it? I imagine people's fears with that is it could be something that would drag on, but is there, like you said, it's in quite a short time? Do you know? Maybe there isn't a time frame.
So I don't know what the precise time frame is. I certainly could check that up and come back to you. But I know in a particular case that I was dealing with that it was quite shortly after the baby was born. It was. In fact, it might even have been the day after the baby was born. Okay. It was quite fast because the birth had to be registered, and it couldn't be registered without the confirmatory order.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair, and thanks everybody. I have to say it's been a really emotional kind of session, and I also just want to acknowledge Senator Siri Carney. I know she's been invaluable to myself anyway in relation to information, but just for her sharing her story as well as all of you that are here. So much has been covered and said, but just a few points. First of all, I welcome the fact that Equality for Children have solutions in their in your documents and your submissions, because we all have a tendency to say it's complex, and it is. But what I've found over the last number of weeks is there's actually loads of solutions out there. It's just a matter of putting them all together in the best way we possibly can. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. For Kathy and for Ciara, I know you've kind of already touched an awful lot on your personal stories, but if there was anything else that you wanted to add, to give you that opportunity. I'm conscious that, as you've said yourselves, this probably wasn't something you ever envisaged happening in your lives. So if there was anything, just even around the whole process, you know, where you first started, and some of that's been covered, so, but I just wanted to give that opportunity. And then to Gillian, I wanted to ask around secondary infertility. Like, infertility is a really lonely space. People don't really have an understanding of it a lot of the time, and people are really harsh as well. The questions that they ask, particularly like as soon as maybe someone gets into a relationship or into a marriage, it's like, when are the kids arriving? Then if you have a boy, when are you having the girl? If you have one, when are you having two? And it's like, okay, so while people kind of mean well, sometimes those comments can be very hurtful. And I just wanted to know, you know, in relation to secondary infertility, because I think sometimes there's a myth out there that people kind of say, well, you have one child, what are you complaining about as such? If there was anything you wanted to say in relation to that, and just to acknowledge the work and the support that you give to people, because, as I said, it is a very lonely space. And then the last question is for everyone, if there's time, just in relation to other models. The Canadian one is one, and I know we're going to have witnesses in from that jurisdiction, and I look forward to that. But what I like, I suppose, is it does acknowledge the bodily autonomy. There's the counselling and everything built in, but then there's no delay or question mark over when the birth is, the rights, the parentage is transferred over. It's done at birth, and I think that's a good system. But just interested to see what you think in relation to that, or is there other models you think we should be looking at? Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Funchion. Yeah, I suppose our stories are very well covered now at this point, but one thing that hasn't been covered is the fact that when we started to undergo surrogacy, it was very taboo. Nobody was talking about it. It was hidden. And, you know, one of the things, I remember going to a NISIC meeting and meeting people who were going through it, and my husband thinking, wow, these are all normal people, we can do this. You know, it was amazing. And so one of the things that we are trying to do in Irish Families Through Surrogacy as well is to really break down those myths around surrogacy and tell people the truth, and tell them our truth, and the reality of it. And, you know, lately we've been trying so hard to raise the social awareness of surrogacy, and obviously thanks to the likes of yourselves and the committee, you know, it's been invaluable to us to shine a spotlight on it, and to really, you know, destigmatise it and take away the myths. And one of the things, you know, from my point of view as a mother of children born through surrogacy is I do not want my children to be stigmatised because of the way that they were born. Children are children, no matter how they were conceived. And, you know, my job as their mother, and all of our jobs, is to fight for them, to make sure, you know, that in no way are they being made feel different. One of the things that I can tell you, I suppose, is this week I faced the reality of not being able to sign another legal document. I'd had it previously before when Elsie was sick, and I was sitting in the car park at the hospital crying my eyes out. But this week they started play school, and it was a very exciting day in our household. And obviously when you start play school you need the forms, and so I had brought the forms home. Keith had filled them in the night before, and when I was walking them up to the door to play school, I didn't have the same, you know, nervous excitement for them, or the same emotional feelings of them, you know, being let out into the real world. In my stomach, I had the anxiety and the upset of knowing that I'd forgotten those forms that my husband had filled in. And I didn't know if they were going to be turned away that day because of that. When I got to the door of the play school, in front of all the people there, I had to tell them, I don't have the forms, I forgot them. And they said, no problem, just fill them in here now. And in front of all my peers and their peers, I had to say, I can't do that. And it made me think about the fact that as they're taking their first steps into the world, how many other times is this going to be the case? How can you tell a child who's excited to go on a school trip that mommy can't sign the permission slip? You know, how can you stand there and know that because of the choices that we made and the legislation that isn't in place, that they're going to be discriminated against if it's not changed? And I can't let that happen. I don't think any of us can. Ted and Elsie are my world. Like everyone's children, you would do absolutely anything for them. And the realisation at that moment at the play school door was then confounded by the fact that the teacher said to Elsie, your mother is going to go and get the forms. And Elsie said, she's not my mother. And I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. And in those moments, everything went through my head of, is she aware, obviously, of I'm not her mother-in-law? Is she aware of the conversations, you know, that subsequently we'd be having? And it felt like a lifetime. But in 2 seconds, she looked at her and she said, she's my mammy. And that's what it boils down to for me. And so as Irish Families Through Surrogacy, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is to, you know, really raise awareness around this. We've been involved in lots of advocacy. We've done research studies with universities. We've collaborated with international organisations to ensure that best practice is in place, even in how we talk to our children. And we've been a liaison with our members, with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Mary Siri Carney, in order to make sure that the information is quick, clear and concise to the people. And that's all we can do. And then come here and plead to ye to make sure that I don't have to face days like that anymore. But in terms of the recognition and Ted and Elsie understanding, I'll pass you over to Gillian now, because NESIC have been running workshops recently that have been hugely beneficial to us.
Hi, thanks a million for your question. I know you're specifically saying about like secondary infertility. Obviously, NISIC provides support services for anybody who approaches us, okay? So we have a helpline that's run by Helen Brown, who started the organisation in 1996. So I just want to say a huge thank you, because without her and the other two ladies, there wouldn't be any organisation. And in those days, there was no awareness, okay? She said there was nowhere to go to. It was very difficult to talk about anything. And the options that were available in those days in terms of HR were very limited. You know, there was some options in terms of helping you to have a baby. For a lot of people, they may not have been able to get there. So she was saying, like, the world is your oyster now in terms of at least there are options or different procedures that you can do. We obviously do support meetings now. It's quite interesting because we had our first support meeting post-COVID last Saturday. So we did it in the Ashleen Hotel in town. I didn't know if anybody would turn up, like, because it's the oncology weekend. I didn't think it through properly, obviously, when I was actually booking the room. But anyway, and we had 7 beautiful people who turned up. But like, some of the conversations that we would have at support meetings would be people who, you know, are just starting to realise they may need a certain amount of help. People who've been on the journey for quite a while. People who obviously have had maybe one child without too much help, or everything went fine, and then suddenly they realise, you know. And I remember one couple said to me, and the husband was there at the meeting, so, and he was kind of saying, you know, they had their first child and say they were 6 or 7, they were trying for another child, and they said this whole issue has kind of like dominated our house, you know, that we tried to have our second child and we did a number of things that didn't work. Then we're talking to maybe a clinic in another country, and he just said, like, you feel like it's just, you know, that kind of way. Even though we have a child, it kind of dominates the landscape, like, and everything is about what are we going to do next, what are our plans, what are our options. But the other thing I would like to say as well is that, you know, we do obviously have people, when they're coming to the meeting, they may have tried for a number of years to have a child, they may have a number of complex issues, but they also may be talking to us as an organisation around, maybe I won't be able to have a child, you know. And that's a conversation, that's a very hard conversation for anybody to have. So they might say to me, you know, I may have to face the fact that I may not be able to. You know, so I may try for 7 years, I may try, and then the conversations around, well, how do I know when to stop? Do you know, that kind of way? How do I know, you know? And that's something that, like, so that's always, you know, I've had like I've had all of these conversations at loads of different meetings, and what I would say is that when I was at the meeting last Saturday, because we hadn't actually been physically in a room with people for a long time, there was one particular lady who spoke, and she was just very upset. And like, it just resonated. It was only at the start of the meeting, but like, it resonated with everybody, because I could feel myself, even though when I had my son and I had help, which 10 years ago, it kind of brings you back to that place again. Do you know, that kind of, so both of them, and within a couple as well, it can be very challenging. At least with NISIC, you can come to a meeting, you can talk to other people, to kind of constantly have that tension around, what are we going to do next? How are we going to manage this? And so, I mean, I suppose what I'd say is that we're basically here for everybody, and we do obviously the best we can to support, and obviously we've got fantastic organisations that we're kind of aligned with, that can help us, and we do help each other. I text Ciara, I text whatever when I need a little bit of help. And the other thing I just want to mention is, I know Kathy was just saying about the workshops that we have been doing, and specifically we did them with couples through surrogacy, and they were really about, they're counsellor-led donor disclosure workshops. So they're really just about counsellors guiding people about the nuts and bolts of how to start the conversation with their younger children about their origins, okay? And that's something that we've done with a number of groups that we started doing, and it's something that we plan to do in the future.
Thanks.
Okay, thank
It's in
you.
relation to the Canadian model, but there mightn't be time, so I'll let, if there's time at the end, we can come back.
Okay, we'll